The surgery is over. So how long are you going to take getting your change of clothes and hospital supplies? At least send me a message.
Behind the husband's voice, I could hear my daughter-in-law shouting, but it was already too late.
Nancy, I'll buy underwear and other things at the hospital shop, so please don't open the drawers.
Since we got married, my husband rarely comes to my family's house. Because of that, my daughter-in-law also avoids coming, and when my daughter visits with her children, who are the same age as my grandkids, my daughter-in-law always tries to assert dominance. It's a rather annoying routine. I live with my slightly older husband and my eldest son's family. My daughter-in-law suddenly complained of stomach pain and was rushed to the hospital by ambulance. Fortunately, it was only appendicitis, so her life wasn't in danger. My husband and grandson went to the hospital, and my eldest son also arrived there, so I went home to prepare for her hospital stay. "I'm sorry, but I'll visit again tomorrow," I said, which led to a shocking turn of events. Marriage is, of course, also a connection between two families, which makes it challenging. However, I believe that's just part of what marriage entails. Doing something like cutting off those connections on your own and keeping them hidden is absolutely unforgivable. I thought, exaggeratedly, that in the past, such actions would lead to immediate. I told them over the phone that I would go to the hospital not on the day my daughter-in-law was admitted, but the next day. After all, I needed time to prepare myself. Now, it's time for them to be ready. My name is Nancy. I'm 62 years old. I'm a freelance funeral director. These days, funerals are scheduled regardless of traditional days off. Different religious sects have their own customs, so it's a surprisingly tough job. But it's a job that someone has to do, and I take pride in it. I met my husband through work. Unlike the younger generation, who seem to care about income or profession, I didn't think much about those things when I graduated from junior college. I got married and had children right away because that's just how things were back then. Now, I have a job and can be independent. I even wonder if marriage is necessary unless you're with someone you truly love. My husband is from the post-war generation and claims they contributed to the advancement of America after the war. I want to say, you were born after the war, weren't you? But perhaps because of that mentality, he never helps with household chores. Nowadays, men who can cook are considered desirable, but even during his parents' care, he didn't lift a finger. Not only that, he didn't even offer words of gratitude. Because of this, I had planned to divorce him once his parents passed away. But after living together for so long, it's not like there are no feelings at all. Now that he's retired and living a leisurely life, his temperament has softened a bit. At least, that's what I thought before my daughter-in-law arrived. My husband, who never had a real hobby, started going to the library, claiming that he was extending his healthy lifespan. He said reading keeps the brain active and that walking around the library, with its many genres of books, helps improve leg strength. But I feel like he only borrowed novels in the beginning. Now, I can only imagine him dozing off in a library chair. Additionally, because my husband doesn't help at all with housework, I had a hard time balancing both my job and household responsibilities. Thankfully, my eldest son and his wife moved in with us, which has been a great help. My daughter-in-law is a housewife, and she takes care of the housework, which I'm truly grateful for. They got married 3 years ago and have a 2-year-old boy. I adore my grandson and tend to spoil him, which earns me scolding from my son and his wife. Though there are small issues here and there, I expected this peaceful life to continue for a long time. I also have a daughter, 2 years younger than my eldest son. She's the same age as my daughter-in-law and even gave birth around the same time. Since my daughter lives nearby, she often drops by. Because of that, the two are always competing with each other, constantly trying to one-up each other about how cute their children are.
Emma, you've been visiting again, haven't you?
Oh, am I not allowed to visit my parents' house?
I didn't say that.
An uncomfortable tension fills the air. Look, the grandkids are playing together so nicely. Isn't that great?
Yes, it is. But starting next year, we're planning to send him to an early education class.
Early education class?
Oh, what a coincidence. We're planning to send our child too.
You too. Isn't it a bit early for that?
Nancy, please stay out of this. 3 years old is already late, if anything.
Exactly, right?
It always ends up like this. I walked into the room without even offering any tea. I thought to myself, if both my daughter-in-law and daughter are sending their kids to early education classes from age 3, my daughter probably won't come around as much anymore, and my daughter-in-law will be out more often too. In a way, I felt a little relieved. However, my daughter soon said something strange.
Hey, Mom. Doesn't that kid look nothing like my brother?
She was staring intently at my eldest son's son. Really? They say young kids tend to resemble different relatives as they grow. At the time, I didn't think much of Emma's comment. After all, even though both are my grandchildren, I tend to find my daughter's child cuter. Maybe that's why my daughter-in-law gets moody whenever Emma visits. And when my daughter-in-law gets upset, the backlash always falls on me. My son had said he married his wife through a friend's introduction. By then, he was past 35, so he was feeling a bit rushed, and a friend set them up. Apparently, my daughter-in-law had the same motivation. A year after they got married, they had their child, and my daughter-in-law became a full-time housewife. She's the type of go-getter you'd expect from a woman in her 40s. Before marriage, she was a wedding planner, the exact opposite of my profession. She quit because she wanted to raise their child perfectly. It seems she plans to return to work once the child is a bit older. Being that kind of person, she also insists on doing all the housework herself. She even told me that she doesn't compromise on anything. During her long years of single life, she apparently mastered all the domestic skills. Every month, she arranges seasonal flowers, carefully selects ingredients, and even changes the artwork in the house to match the seasons. She's good at cooking and impeccable at cleaning. Since she moved in with us, she hasn't let me do anything around the house.
Nancy, you must be tired from your work, so please rest.
I can manage just fine.
No, this is my responsibility.
I wasn't even allowed to help with clearing the dishes after meals. She reorganized everything in the house, talking about the flow of chores. She even swapped the contents of the drawers and labeled everything, so it was easy to find. My elderly husband praised her, saying it was incredibly helpful, but I felt like my home was no longer mine, and I started to feel a bit unsettled.
Nancy, you put the towels in the wrong place again.
Oh, sorry, it's just a habit. I kept getting scolded like that. I wished she would consult me before moving things around. My husband's generation is known for being sensitive to trends and moving in groups, but my husband has never been one to follow the crowd. He's not particularly interested in trends either. Maybe that's why he dislikes interacting with my family. He's been that way since we got married. People say we're now living in the era of 100-year lifespans, but the average life expectancy for men is about 73 years and 79 years for women. My father passed away 2 years ago due to illness. He lived a bit longer than the average, reaching 75. My mother now lives with my sister, who's 3 years younger than me. One day, my husband asked me out of the blue,
Is your mother still doing well?
"Yes, for now. Other than slightly high blood pressure, she doesn't seem to have any serious health issues."
I heard the average life expectancy for American women is around 79.
So, what about it?
So, how old is your mother again?
She's 83. What are you trying to say?
Well, it's about time. You should remind her to take care of herself.
What do you mean, take care? That's a bit ominous, don't you think?
Well, when the time comes, you're the funeral director, after all.
With that, my husband quickly walked away, leaving me stunned and at a loss for words. His sudden remark brought back a flood of memories from our life together. How he never helped much with raising the kids, how he was indifferent when it came to caring for his parents, and how he had little involvement with my side of the family. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there were countless things that bothered me. As these thoughts settled in, I began to feel like I had reached my limit with our life together. My mother's health isn't the best, but I feel at ease knowing my younger sister lives with her. My sister is a single career woman, and her company extended her retirement age to 65, so she plans to work until then. It's not unusual these days for people in their 50s and older to remain single. According to a study, 1 in 4 men and 1 in 6 women remain unmarried for life. Because my husband has little connection with my family, my daughter-in-law, Amy, doesn't have a high opinion of them either.
Your sister is still working, right?
Yes, she is. She's single and very responsible.
So, she must have quite a bit saved up, right?
I found her comment strange and wondered what she was implying. My sister's savings had absolutely nothing to do with my daughter-in-law. I thought it was a bit rude, and at the same time, I couldn't figure out what was going through her mind. We gathered at my family's house for my father's 3rd death anniversary. The last time my daughter-in-law came, the first thing she said was the same as this time.
Doesn't anyone clean this house?
My mother is elderly, and my sister is busy with work.
Still, don't you think it's pretty bad?
To make matters worse, my husband chimed in.
Once we finish the incense offering, let's head out.
Hey, both of you need to knock it off. Then, my sister stood in front of me and said,
I did my best to clean, and this is our father's 3rd death anniversary. Could you please stay until the end? I'm asking you sincerely.
With that, my sister knelt on the floor. Seeing her attitude, perhaps my husband and daughter-in-law felt at least a little guilty, as they finally fell silent, and the situation was resolved. The 3rd anniversary passed without further incident, but my husband and daughter-in-law left without even touching the prepared food. My eldest son and I both felt deeply apologetic toward my mother and sister. When I apologized to them, they reassured me that they weren't bothered, which made me feel somewhat relieved. However, I silently decided that I wouldn't bring my husband or daughter-in-law to my family home again. My husband had always been a stubborn man, but ever since we started living with my eldest son's wife, he had become even more inflexible. More accurately, his behavior towards me seemed entirely controlled by my daughter-in-law. One day, my eldest daughter came over again with her child. She told me about the many children's classes available nowadays, and how they had recently visited one. At one of those classes, my grandchild had been praised for their artwork. I couldn't help but feel proud and said, "Oh, really? That's wonderful." It seemed my daughter-in-law overheard this conversation, and whether out of jealousy or frustration, she left the house without a word. As unbelievable as it seemed, she immediately took her own child to a children's class as well. Apparently, she couldn't let it go. About 2 hours later, she reported back that her child had also been praised for their artwork. Even though she seemed visibly exhausted, it was clear she couldn't let this competition slide, and I felt sorry for my grandchild, who was being dragged into it. I wondered if my daughter-in-law was simply too stressed and lacking any emotional bandwidth. "Oh, that's nice," I said, though I'm sure my face looked strained.
I knew it. You love your daughter's child more, don't you?
With those cutting words, she disappeared into her room. Later, it became clear that she had told my husband about this, because he confronted me.
Stop letting your daughter visit so often. She's married now.
His blatant favoritism toward my daughter-in-law made me snap. It's fine if my daughter wants to visit her family. But my husband just turned his back on me, pretending not to hear. I called my daughter afterward, just to caution her not to say or do anything that might provoke my daughter-in-law. One day, my daughter-in-law, who always tried to be so perfect, complained of stomach pain. It was my grandchild who told me.
It's nothing serious.
I replied, "You're sweating, and that's not normal. We should go to the hospital." No matter how many times I said it, she kept insisting she was fine. I even had my husband try to convince her, but she stubbornly claimed she would feel better if she just rested. So, I took over the housework for the first time in a while, thinking it was fortunate I had the day off work. Then, I heard her moaning again, and this time, I called an ambulance. I accompanied her, and later, my husband and grandchild arrived at the hospital. She was immediately taken in for surgery, and it turned out to be appendicitis. I was relieved when they said her life wasn't in danger. After contacting my eldest son, who also came to stay with her, I went back home to gather the things she would need for her hospital stay. Since moving in with my daughter-in-law, Many things had been rearranged in the house. Even the places I used to keep important items had been changed. After some searching, I finally found her insurance card and toiletries, and I packed them in a bag. I opened her drawers, thinking I should bring some of her clothes as well. As I rifled through her drawers, I thought, will she be angry at me for touching her underwear later? It took me some time to find it, since the drawer didn't have any label. Finally, I found her neatly arranged underwear, but then I noticed an A4-sized box inside the drawer. Maybe it was soap or something similar, I thought, but the box made me curious. When I opened it, I was horrified by what I found: photos of my husband and daughter-in-law, and more documents inside. In a panic, I fled to my parents' house. On the way, my husband called me.
The surgery is over, so when are you coming back with her clothes and hospital supplies? At least send me a message.
I replied, sorry, but I'll go to the hospital tomorrow. And hung up. In the background, I could hear Amy say,
Nancy, I can buy my underwear from the hospital shop, so please don't open my drawers.
but it was too late. The secret was already out. The photos in the box showed my husband and daughter-in-law together, holding documents. Both of them were smiling broadly, and the documents they were holding were titled Marriage Dissolution Agreement. Sometimes referred to as a posthumous divorce, it was my first time seeing such a document. The form ends the familial relationship between a deceased spouse's relatives and the surviving spouse. Apparently, the number of these filings has increased 2.5 times in a country over the last decade. The most common reason is that the surviving spouse doesn't want to be buried with the deceased spouse's family. This document could be submitted to the local government office where the family register or address is located, and once filed, it can't be revoked. It's solely a procedure to sever ties with the deceased spouse's family, and it can be submitted anytime after the spouse's death. What's more, in the case of a posthumous divorce, the marital relationship between the spouses remains intact on the family register, meaning the surviving spouse can still inherit the deceased's assets. Being in the profession I'm in, I only ever wear pearls, so I always store the rest of my jewelry away. But to my shock, I found them all collected in that box. When had my daughter-in-law claimed them as her own? I began to suspect my husband had put her up to it. It was clear that they were planning for me to pass away first, take over my assets, and cut ties with my family. I had no idea they despised my family so much. I had cared for my husband's parents myself. He never helped or even thanked me. Just thinking about it made the anger I had been suppressing all these years start to boil over. The day after my daughter-in-law's hospitalization, I confronted my husband with those documents, accompanied by a lawyer.
Why are you getting here so late? You're way behind.
I had some discussions with the lawyer. I replied,
What? Discussions with a lawyer? What's going on?
I'm not filing this document, I said as I slammed down the marriage dissolution agreement alongside the photo of him and my daughter-in-law holding it. I'm submitting a divorce. Amy, muttering under her breath, said,
I told you, I would buy my underwear from the hospital shop.
Are you kidding me? That's not what I'm talking about.
It's not like I said I wanted to divorce you.
This is a document to cut ties with my family. It's the same thing. I snapped. All the pent-up frustration I had kept inside. The lack of even a word of thanks when I took care of his parents, his dislike of visiting my family, the time he made my sister apologize by kneeling in front of him, how everything in the house had been rearranged without my consent, even finding my jewelry packed away with that document. It all came pouring out so fast I could barely keep track of what I was saying.
Nancy, there's no need to get so worked up.
She said, visibly nervous. But my eldest son, John, turned to my husband and daughter-in-law and said,
"What the hell are you two doing behind my back? Dad, you too!"
Just then, my daughter Emma walked into the hospital room. Amy, trying to force a smile to lighten the tense atmosphere, said,
Oh, you came to visit? How kind of you.
Yes. I heard it was appendicitis. Perhaps they should have removed some other pests while they were at it.
What do you mean by that? Oh, ouch.
Maybe it was too harsh for someone just out of surgery. I hoped her wound wouldn't get worse, I thought.
I've done my research. The child isn't my brother's, is it?
What? That's impossible. There's no way.
She's been using you, John. I've got proof.
John was speechless, shocked.
Before she even started dating you, she was seeing someone else. I'll let the lawyer explain the rest.
After I left my house and went to my parents' place, I had contacted my daughter. Coincidentally, she had something to tell me too. While I didn't blame the child, the fact that it wasn't my son's changed everything. Seeing how shaken I was, Emma had brought in the lawyer. Emma then took her 2 children and left the hospital room, knowing this wasn't a conversation they should hear. It turned out that before meeting my son, my daughter-in-law had been seeing another man, who was married. She was thinking of ending things with him when she met my son through an introduction and decided to marry him. When she found out she was pregnant, she wasn't even sure whose child it was. In other words, she had been seeing both my son and the married man at the same time. Emma had suspected something when she noticed the child didn't resemble her brother. After a DNA test confirmed there was no parent-child relationship, she had hired a private investigator. Confronted with all the evidence, Amy finally broke down in tears.
I didn't mean to deceive anyone. It wasn't like that.
But you did deceive me, didn't you?
Come on now. Isn't it fine to just keep things as they were?
I couldn't believe how casually he said that, fully on her side now. I told him, I'm divorcing you. Do what you want after that. And I walked out of the hospital room. Though my husband tried to say,
I never said I wanted a divorce.
This time it was my turn to pretend not to hear him.
I'm going to Mom's place too. I'll send over the divorce papers later.
No, but things were finally going so well. I thought we were happy.
Hearing John's words, Amy collapsed in tears again. Her illusion of a perfect life shattered. She cried loudly enough that a nurse came rushing in.
Is your wound hurting? Are you all right?
I thought to myself, it's her heart that's hurting now. My husband reluctantly signed the divorce papers. Without knowing how to do any housework, he struggled after the separation. Meanwhile, Amy, unable to return to her own family after the deception, was in a difficult situation herself. Apparently, she had even tried reaching out to her former lover, but he didn't respond and offered no child support either. That man had likely moved on to another affair, perhaps with another unsuspecting woman. In the end, Amy was left living with my ex-husband, both of them struggling to make ends meet. His pension alone wasn't enough to support them, and the dream of sending their child to a private school was long gone. Amy tried to return to her job as a wedding planner, but balancing work with childcare proved to be more difficult than she had expected. And yet, she still hadn't signed the divorce papers. I couldn't help but wonder if she believed that, someday, John would come back to her. Maybe she even thought that if she played the long game and helped care for my ex-husband in his old age, things would somehow return to the way they were. But life doesn't work that way. As for me, I continued living with my mother, sister, and John, just as we had planned. My mother, now elderly, seemed overjoyed by the renewed liveliness in the house. John, though still heartbroken from the ordeal, was gradually recovering, and I hoped that someday he would meet someone new, someone who would love him for who he truly was. I found myself reflecting on the past. If only I had left my husband when I was younger, would I have had another chance at happiness? It was a fleeting thought, but in the end, I knew that what mattered now was being there for my family and making the most of the time we had left together. My sister and I even started talking about taking a trip together. A way to make up for all the years of tension and distance caused by my ex-husband. It was a long overdue step toward healing. How did you like today's story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.